Well, welcome everybody to the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum. It's a wonderful group here today. Just a show of hands, how many people work for Admiral Paparo? Okay, so no, that's pretty good. You have a lot of attendance and your bride is here. He works for you, right? So today is the very special hangar talk, and we have Admiral Sam Paparo here with Lieutenant General Dan Leaf. But this is actually a prelude to a wonderful weekend that's going to occur on Ford Island on the 3rd and 4th of June, because the Joint Base has opened up Ford Island to our community. The Navy's going to have a destroyer, we'll have helicopters here, and the museum will have an open house, heavily focused on STEM activities for our children and community. And it marks the return of the biggest little air show that will come back and allow our children to fly RC aircraft and also have displays of them throughout the day. So please come sign up on the website to make sure you can get on, drive your car into the installation, and welcome back to Ford Island. So it's wonderful that the Navy, the Joint Base under Admiral Paparo, has opened this back up to the community. So today kind of kicks it all off. And today we're going to talk about basically the history of Pearl Harbor, the historical perspective, and how it is important to our national security and our national military strategy going forward. So we sit on very hallowed ground. And to do that, Admiral Paparo is the commander of the Pacific Fleet, but he brings a very unique perspective to this position. He is steeped in naval aviation, having flown the Navy's fighters, operated for most of the aircraft carriers, but he has also served around the world. He has served from Japan to the Pacific. He has served in DC. He has served as the Director of Operations for Central Command. He's operated the fleet in Bahrain. He's operated the Air Ops Center in Qatar, and he's had boots on the ground in Afghanistan. Not just a quick 1-2 day, he was deployed there. He has served with the U.S. Air Force. He has served with the U.S. Army. He has served with our coalition partners. So truly in this position as the leader of the Pacific Fleet, he comes to with a very, very global perspective. And perhaps you might have seen him on the 60 Minutes episode where he had a chance to talk to the world about the views of the Pacific Fleet here. Our moderator is Lieutenant General Dan Leaf, retired Air Force, also a very seasoned combat aviation veteran in the Air Force. He has served in Europe, extensively in Korea, in Japan, and on the PACAF staff, and also as the deputy and acting commander of PACOM. Retiring from the military, he was the director of the Asia Pacific Center. So again, a very large view of the region. And he's continued his work with U.S.-Korean relationships. And perhaps you saw one of his pieces in the New York Times and also on CNN. So we couldn't have two more august people to have this conversation about this hollow ground that we call Pearl Harbor. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, General Johns, Ray Johns, the chairman of the board here at our fantastic museum. That's what he thinks we're going to talk about, okay? We don't know yet, because we're a couple of fighter pilots, so we're going to talk about flying and flying from carrier and the Pacific and big things and little things. And it's going to be awesome because this is a pretty awesome guy I enjoy talking to. And Maureen, it's great to see you. We get to serve together on a board for Armed Services, YMCA Hawaii. So we're going to have fun. And our intention is that you do too. Admiral, I'm going to call you Pappy or Sam at different times. I'll be thinking Admiral because you do have 4 stars, but welcome to the museum again. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Fig. Great to see you, General Leaf. I'm going to call you Fig because that's the only way I know you. And in fact, we were at Langley around the same time when I was flying F-15s. And so it's been 30 years, but I only just learned that you were baptized with the name Daniel, having known you Fig my whole life. So it's great to be with you.
And I assume Pappy is simply a play on words, or does it have another sub meaning?
No sub meaning, although there may have been some Freudian elements. We have 6 children,
Yeah.
so but that had nothing to do with the Pappy part. But usually you get your call signed by either A, doing something notable, or B, having to do with your name. And so, and when you've done something notable, like Flaps McKenzie is a guy who didn't drop his flaps,
Right.
and Skids Moore would be a guy that didn't drop his landing gear.
In the Air Force might have gone off the runway.
Yeah. But Big Leaf and Pappy Paparo,
Excellent.
it's just entirely related to my last name.
So we've never screwed up, and that's the beauty of that.
Been caught,
Um,
never been caught.
so let's start just being fighter pilots and then talk about how do you get there. Why do we have call signs in your mind?
Mm.
And in the Air Force, it's more social now, but it used to be truly tactical. But in the Navy, what do you?
Yeah, originally it was a way that we could communicate with one another without expressing our names from a standpoint of operational security. So that radio communications, having been the ability to be intercepted, you wouldn't want the enemy to know your name, because if they knew their name, they could find points to exploit you. They could find points if you were shot down to be able to extract information from you by expressing elements. They could do, a bit of research along the way. And then, in a lot of military cultures, we operate under nicknames also.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of a combination of operation security and a nickname culture that and it is universal to Army, Navy, Marine Corps fighter pilots. And if you go overseas and you meet a fighter pilot from a partner nation, they will express their name as a call sign. And so it's just something that's
It's a
empirically
real thing.
developed.
Yeah.
It's a part of the culture in aviation.
In the Navy, when does an aviator get their call sign? I'll tell you when the Air Force does after I learn about the Navy, but where in the sequence do you get your
You
call sign?
start to get one in the training command, but if you show up and your name is Viper McKenzie, when you get to your first squadron, they'll rename you as Worm or something like that. So
That could be an actual example.
So you've got to step lightly around the topic, but then at a point, the squadron commanding officer gets to the front of the ready room. The ready room is that it's related to the aircraft carrier where you're in readiness to go fly. And the skipper says, okay, it's time to name this person, to give a call sign. And then the pilots all propose various call signs and defend the call sign that they're going to. There's a few gag ones in there along the way. And then ultimately the squadron decides and you are so named. And having flown F-15s in the Air Force, you'd find it to be a very similar event within an Air Force squadron.
So as an aside, my daughter is a mid-level executive at Google, but she does strategy and transformation for them. She was an Air Force intel officer, and she's a gifted leader, which is absolutely not genetic. But but she maintains, and as a serious student of leadership and culture, that even the sort of hazing side of that, because it's done universally and equally, creates a safe environment where you're going to get feedback if you forget your flaps or go off the runway. But it's all about camaraderie in the end and being part of a team. In the Air Force, it happens usually in your first mission ready, combat ready unit. They'll tinker around with nicknames. I had a different one before I started flying the F-15, and no, I'm not sharing it. Thank you very much. But the one thing that I don't think you could do in a ready room is Air Forces have heritage rooms, which might look like a tavern. They might, but they're heritage rooms. And if they have a really nice flat screen TV or stereo, somebody bought their way out of a really bad call sign. Does that ever happen in the Navy?
No, there's a lot of bad call signs out there.
Okay. Well, you might consider upgrading the stuff. So, Pappy, how did your journey to be a naval aviator begin? What was the first glimmer of I want to do that?
It sounds like such a small thing, but for parents, there might be a bit of instruction in it. But there was this toy when I was a kid called You Fly It. And you could go onto YouTube and see the old commercial for it, and you'd string a piece of fishing line from a high place to a low place, and there was an airplane and there was a stick that attached to it. And then you guided the airplane via this fishing line. I mean, this is before video games.
It wasn't an app.
No.
No.
And then you guided that onto the runway. And so, you know, I just had those, I had those dreams of flying as just as a small boy. And then in the summer of 1976, my grandfather took myself and all my cousins to see Midway. Henry Fonda as Chester Nimitz, and Charlton Heston as the Air Wing commander, and Cliff Robertson as the squadron skipper of the squadron. And the Navy airplanes battling it out over Midway, originating here from Hawaii, here at Pearl. And I spent the summer of 1976 sketching out SBD Dauntless and Wildcats. And my father had been a Marine. All of my uncles had served in either the Marine Corps or the Army. Our grandfather had been a sailor in the Second World War, had served here in Hawaii and Guam and Dutch Harbor and in the Marshall Islands. And so I felt some compellence to serve. You know, I'd had that plan. I really thought I was on a path to go to law school, but I was approached by some recruiters, and I thought I'd seek adventure for just a few years.
Well,
And,
here's my assessment. You chose wisely.
Yeah.
Wow. I have to think, and I've got chicken skin because I think this about things like this. The moment you took command of U.S. Pacific Fleet, that must have come flooding back to you.
It did, yeah, and there's so many blessings in our lives that seemingly to us sometimes happen by accident, but I felt the touch of the divine on the great gift and the great blessing of coming here to Hawaii and to be able to serve in this role.
Wow. So I have another similar thread in that my grandfather was a Marine who served in World War I, and then my father was a naval officer commissioned through the V-12 program. He said it was victory in 12 years or we fight, because he spent most of the war in college and felt guilty about it, frankly. But right after the war, he lived here on Ford Island and taught math to sailors. So missed the war, but still got some Navy on him. And that gives, I think we both have a special feeling about this place. So that led you to the Navy. Did you know much about the history of the emergence of carrier aviation? Had you studied that in your fascination with Midway, or how did your sense of both I'm a Navy fighter pilot and in the sense of the strategic value of carrier aviation, how did that evolve?
I learned it over time. Just you know, I was first taken with the elan of flying tactical airplanes and landing them aboard the pitching and heaving decks at sea, and I was taken by that. I was also taken in the 1980s. Is that I have a vivid memory of the two F-14s, the Sukhoi killers in the Gulf of Sidra, over the line of death, as it was then called. And this next generation of fighters, the F-14, the F-15 at the time, was such a quantum leap in capability. And all of and then the elan of naval aviation, of the ability to do all of these things, and the unique ability to do it from an aircraft carrier at night, it struck as such a tremendous challenge. And a lot of that is why many of us join the service, is we do so out of love of country, but we also do so because we want to challenge ourselves and we want to become better versions of ourselves. And then frequently the reason we stay is that we've loved the country and we've wanted to serve. We've wanted to become better versions of ourselves. And then we stay for each other. We stay for each other because of the camaraderie, and then the obligation to bring up the next generation with what we've learned. And all of those were factors in this journey thus far.
And in my mind, it's kind of a glorious crucible because you never get done learning, and it never becomes easy. I know my pilot training class, which was not at Kitty Hawk, as some of you may think, we started 44 and graduated 22 overall, and only 4 of us got to fly fighters. I'm sure you saw a lot of attrition in your training. It was the little landing on pitching deck, sometimes in the dark of night thing, the cause of most attrition. Is that what really scrubbed off those who weren't going to be Navy fighter pilots?
I think frequently there are physical elements that present themselves because the requirement to fly requires some tight medical tolerances that have nothing to do with us.
Right.
Sometimes it happened in the pool. Is because
dunk or what
somebody is always strapping you to something, blindfolding you and bringing you underwater and demanding that you find your way out of it. And so there's steps along the way along the attrition, and some of them are physical, and then some of them are just are skills that you brought along the way, but you know, we're granted with various forms of intelligence in so many different ways. It's not you're smart enough or you're physical enough for this thing or the other. They're just such a specialized set of skill sets that wouldn't measure well on an IQ test, doesn't measure at all on an IQ test. And so between the academics, the physical, swim and physiology, the gross motor skills, the fine motor skills, the ability to make decisions quickly, the ability to revisit decisions when you've made a decision quickly and you've got to readjust your path, the ability to overcome difficult tasks and to be able to do it, is that the attrition results from a broad set of all those things. What I never saw attrition as a result of a character flaw,
right,
or as a flaw in intelligence. You know, they were usually the intangibles that you can't measure for.
Yeah, and the physical standards are sort of immutable unless the Air Force forgets that you're colorblind. That's another story. So they knew, but they forgot. And to me, the fact that you're always held to standard is it's just a great place to be, because I don't care if you were to go out and fly as a 4-star with a 03 Navy lieutenant leading you around and didn't do something right, they'd tell you. And I love that.
Deference to expertise, which is deference to skill, is one of the highlights. And you're the squadron CO and you're -2, and you have not executed your targeting responsibilities. You have not had your radar in the right place. You've been out of formation. It's immediate feedback, you know, immediate review, immediate exposure of the error, and then immediate feedback. And then there's an element of forgiveness in it, is that we strive for a perfect flight that we'll never achieve. And we take on board criticism. The highest form of character that you can take is, roger that, I'll take that lesson on board, and then to try to foreclose the error later. And the reason that we have training is because you're going to make that error again. Try as you might to avoid it, is to understand that we ourselves are human, and so to expose the ways in which we were imperfect, to try to close the gap to perfection, and to be able to understand in each other that we're always striving for perfection, and support that within each other, and being ruthless in our exposure of those errors, and being complete in our embracing the effort to get better.
So that very thoughtful, esoteric soliloquy leads me to a good intellectual follow on Top Gun Maverick. Actually, the two are related because I like Top Gun. It was a fun movie, pretty. We know it's not exactly the way it is, and neither was Top Gun Maverick. But what I appreciated about Top Gun Maverick, which screened here at the museum, as you recall, was that it was more about teamwork than individual competition. Certainly there's individual competition. And I still see people as I travel, who I flew fighters with, and I'm still pretty sure I can kick their butts. I'm not sure I could back then. I'm pretty sure I couldn't now, but that's still my attitude. But Top Gun Maverick really showed the importance of teamwork, whether it's single seat pilots working with another airplane or within the cockpit. What do you think?
What I also appreciated out of Top Gun Maverick was how it highlighted everybody that came together to make the mission go. And, recalling one of the main characters was the warrant officer, who was the maintenance officer, who was such a leader for Tom Cruise. And then during the critical mission, the E-2 Hawkeye was building the air picture. USS Leyte Gulf had launched the Tomahawk land attack missiles that suppressed the enemy air defenses. And then the formation came in to go fly and to execute the mission itself. And so I thought that was a consistent theme through the movie. In fact, even to an extent, the original Top Gun, that was the theme also on Maverick's journey, is that Maverick left his wingman to go after Viper.
Yep.
He lost Goose when departing from the Standard. Iceman told him, "It's not your flying, it's you're dangerous, and whose side are you on anyway?" It was the main character saying, "Remember, in the end, we're a team out there."
Yeah.
And that theme, I thought they built out a richer element of that theme in Top Gun Maverick. It was very enjoyable.
And that, from my now long ago fighter career, when memories flash back, as they do, and some people generally say, "Do you miss it?" How can I miss it? I had such a blessed life. How can I feel bad about not doing it now? But the teamwork flashes back. So when you talked about the suppression of the SAMs, I remember a high-speed anti-radiation missile going right over my head as I came off target on a combat mission. I'm glad they were there. In a less serious vein, if we dropped you into a country that looked a lot like Iran but wasn't named in the movie, could you start that Tomcat and get it out of there?
Yes. I can do that. Definitely. In a heartbeat.
Okay, well, that's a simple answer.
Yes.
Good.
Also on the Eagle, JFS.
Yeah, so now we're
finger lifts. Yes.
going back to our muscle memory of flying the F-15, as we both did, which I'm not going to force Pappy to admit is the greatest air superiority fighter ever, but I will say 104 kills, 0 losses in air combat, and leave it at that. Let's talk about this place, small to big. We have a map somewhere. If we can bring the map up, that'd be awesome. We always think of Honolulu as a small town and Hawaii as a kind of small place in a big location. But this little place where we are right now, Pearl Harbor, has got outsized strategic importance and has since even before World War II. Thoughts on the strategic importance? Because Ray said we have to talk about this. So.
Well, before we ever talk about the strategic importance, we should just talk about how much we treasure it as a state, as a part of the rich fabric of the country. And Hawaii is such a unique state as the crossroads of the world. And it starts with it's the most remote island chain. in the entire world with the greatest distance between major land masses and continents of any in the world, and a crossroads of culture from all around the world that all combined here on this string of pearls here in the middle of the greatest sea in the world. And what a privilege it is that we call this one of the United States. And then the next is culturally, is that in an increasingly interconnected world, an island that enjoys elements of Asian culture, of Polynesian, Micronesian, Melanesian culture, of the culture of the mainland, and even of Europe, that all combined here harmoniously here in Hawaii. It gives us a tremendous understanding of the universality of the human experience. And then building out greater is that in a world that's greater connected, to have those cultural touch points here in Hawaii for the United States of America, but then to also have this magnificent, unique, sheltered harbor. And Prince Kuhio was such a visionary in recognizing the power of this harbor in the coming strategic environment, and offering Pearl Harbor to the United States military to operate out of even before Hawaii became a state. And to this day, where the world's economic and military center of gravity from 200 years ago has shifted from Central Europe to somewhere here in the Indian Ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, here, it has only rose in importance. So internationally, from a trade standpoint, culturally, in the way that we keep the peace, in the way that we prepare for war, Hawaii is the crown jewel of the United States of America.
How many of you live here or are stationed here if you're military? I'm sure we have some visitors. I think we underappreciate not anything that you said, and the beauty of it and how blessed we are to live here and the importance of the place. But what I saw as the director at Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies was it allows leaders like Pappy and others to do things that you can't do anywhere else. The convening power and the culture of aloha is strategically different in my mind. You can get more done, and that's part of why often when you have senior visitors here, you bring them out and get them on the barge, which is a nice barge, by the way, and take them out there. But it has an impact you can't get anywhere else, right?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, the spirit aloha certainly just represents the very best of humanity, and you can't. There is no hard power or soft power countering what you get from the spirit aloha.
Couldn't agree more. So here's a good question. One of our first questions submitted online, I think, that is relevant. So the history. You can talk to Prince Kuhio and Midway all the way around. How do you teach, you personally and you, the Navy, how do you teach this important history, this fabric of the past to new sailors, to the upcoming generations?
I mean, we teach it in boot camp for sure. And I think, but I really think at every level of leadership, it's important that you touch on those that came before you, so that you can avail yourself to the fighting spirit, so that you can understand the traditions that we have, the military traditions in some cases, which all lead to a particular function that makes units more effective, that helps units team together. We do so with our, we do so in our key schools. You can walk in any headquarters and you'll see commemorations of the past, right, dotting the place. And so, and what we're like in the Navy is that, how many Navy guys does it take to change a light bulb? It takes 3. one, to change it, and two, to talk about how great the old light bulb was. So, the building that I work in is the same
Right.
headquarters building that Chester Nimitz worked in from August 1942 until the end of the war. And in fact, I live in the house Chester Nimitz lived in. It's an appreciation for history is really within the
Right.
fabric of the United States Navy. We even have our own language that nobody really can decipher. Where you say yes, sir, we say aye, sir. We stand on decks. We lean on bulkheads. We look up at overheads. We go up ladder wells, passageways. We drink out of scuttlebutts. Respect for tradition and respect for the past is a key fabric of being in the Navy, and for that matter, in the Marine Corps, and it suffuses every single thing that we do every day. And in doing so, we don't let ourselves become hidebound to technology and to techniques and to tactics and procedures, but we think about the Navy as a learning system that adjusted from the days of battleships to rifled gun barrels to steam propulsion to nuclear power, to aircraft carriers, to unmanned systems, to all of the innovations that we bring along the way, while cleaving to our military traditions and our unique identity as maritime services.
20 years ago, I served with the land forces during the invasion of Iraq, and one of my soldier friends said, the only tradition the Air Force has is not having any traditions. Maybe we do call signs, we have some other things, but we have an operational culture, and this is going to lead into my question about Navy operational culture in the Pacific and its relevance there. The Air Force culture really is, if you study the history, to be expeditionary. From the aviation presence in France in World War I to North Africa, to the places we flew out of in the Pacific, to our rapid deployments into bases in Vietnam and Thailand. That's what we do. I led a wing that went from 60 to 212 airplanes, all flowing into our expeditionary base at Aviano. The Navy's culture, and I don't know what the current terms of art are for describing it, but you can take your boats anywhere and provide air power on call around the globe. That is an operational culture, and it's part of demanding access and practicing access. How has that changed over your career? The ability to, and the demands of getting ships where you need them and being able to sail and fly where you have to.
Well, I mean, one of the things that has not changed is our culture of mission command. And so just hearkening back to 1854, for example, Commodore Matthew Perry was sent to Tokyo Bay with the instructions of establish relationships. And that was the only guidance he was given. And he and his squadron of ships sailed into Tokyo One and established the U.S.-Japan relationship. The elements of mission command, that is the delivery of commander's intent to a commander, and then unlocking that commander's creativity and trusting in that commander, is an unchanged element in Navy culture. And early in the days of sail, you opened your orders. Your order said, go to this sea and patrol and raid commerce, patrol for warships, escort convoys. And that was the only guidance that you were given. And some of this goes back to even, some of these traditions are in the Royal Navy. When at the Battle of Trafalgar, Admiral Nelson's instructions to the fleet was, England expects every man shall do his duty. And that was the only guidance that he gave, unlocking the creativity of his team. Having trained together with the team, they knew each other's moves and they were ready to respond to that. It happens also that Chester Nimitz, as the Battle of Midway was joined, sent commander's guidance to Admiral Spruance, who was the task group commander. And his guidance was, operate on the principles of calculated risk. put the fleet at risk only when the benefits outweigh the risk. And that was the only guidance that Admiral Nimitz presented to Admiral Spruance. We strive to maintain that expeditionary culture and that culture of mission command, giving clear but non-specific guidance and counting on the creativity and the daring of each person that's in the fleet.
How difficult, if I may interrupt, Pappy, how much more difficult is that in an era of instant communication that allows micromanagement? Yes, I have experienced this. When you're trying to win the war and somebody in Washington, D.C. or anywhere has a better idea at the moment. So it's got to be harder now.
There's more complexity because commanders at headquarters have better viewpoints of what's going on tactically. And commanders have got to be disciplined about not weighing in and giving minute tactical detail to commanders when given the information that they can see and the information that they have. And sometimes the commander may have better information than the local commander has on the scene and may give some guidance that is specific that the local commander doesn't understand, because there may be some exquisite piece of intelligence that the local commander does not have access to, or there may be some political development that they don't have access to. Like for instance, is the great Battle of New Orleans forgive me, in the War of 1812, the Battle of New Orleans. That battle was fought 3 months after the peace had been gained. I think if we'd had modern communications, we could have averted that battle.
Right.
If we just said, like, hey, by the way, guys, it's all over and we're pals again. The power of modern communications over tactical execution requires commanders to be disciplined about the guidance that they give local commanders. And it also requires sometimes for local commanders to trust that this guidance that I'm getting from my higher headquarters is for a good reason. And the way you overcome those barriers is by, when able and in every opportunity that you can, communicating fully with people so that everybody knows where everybody's coming from. But it's definitely a more complex environment. We've got to continue to be able to unlock the creativity of the people that are in the field. And we've got to be able to, but we can't build dependency so that the people in the field are just voice-generated autopilots, so that human beings can see, decide, and act. And we have 340,000 unique intelligences in the United States Navy. It's the job of commanders to have each one of those 340,000 souls be able to contribute to the maximum extent they can towards the teamwork that we seek.
And often when we see news that a skipper or a commander has been relieved from command, that seems like bad news. And if it's a behavior issue, yeah, it's bad news. But if it's a mission performance issue, I see it as good news, is not just upholding the standards, but having a culture where the commander will decide and act. And if it works out badly, bummer.
In the history of Second World War, there were many commanders that were relieved of command. Yep. And it was almost never because of a character issue. And when we talk about command, the standard is confidence. What you'll see in the press when a commander is relieved is that we no longer have confidence in this person's ability to command. Seldom is it punitive. And the act of relieving someone of command is not a punitive act. It is undeniable that it is a difficult situation for everybody involved, most especially the commander that's being relieved. But we don't relieve people of command to punish them. We relieve people of command for the good of the unit and the good of the service. And because the person that's involved just can't command that unit effectively anymore. And we're in a life and death biz. And that must be forefront in our minds at all times. And in the times when I've had to relieve someone from command, I said, this doesn't mean that you're not going to be successful in life. It's just, it ain't going to be here. And so you've got to be able to recover from this in your own self. And then we as a unit have got to, and being plain spoken about that is really important. And the debt that is owed is not to that commander, but you can look around and there's a number of young troops that you can see here in the middle part of the theater. And that is the people to whom we owe the very best commanders that we can develop.
Amen. So there's a lot going on in the Pacific. There are some challenges. Rising China, their assertiveness, that's a nice word, in the South China Sea with regard to Taiwan and really everywhere else. The threat from North Korea, this new relationship without limits between Russia and China, many other considerations. But I'm sure you're asked at times what causes you to lose sleep. I don't want to ask you that because I'm sure you're asked that at times. But what would you like, obviously within the limits of classification, about the United States Navy and its presence and ability in the Pacific to cause potential enemies not to lose sleep, but to lose interest in doing something aggressive?
I think you call to mind first our very highest duty. And I'll quote an Air Force leader in the history of our shared aviation experience, and that's Curtis LeMay, whose great quote was, "Peace is our profession." That's such a powerful statement. Peace is the goal, and a profession is more than a job. You know, a profession has an ethos. A profession has a set of unique, distinct trainings that you've achieved. It's got a skill level that you've achieved. And I want our would-be adversaries to know that the joint force, across the joint force, not just the United States Navy, because we all of the joint force, we depend on one another. And in the end, who teams the best is who's going to win. I gave an example here recently too, but it's a very esoteric example. But the 2005 Detroit Pistons was an NBA championship team. There wasn't a single superstar on that team. But the way that those 5 players played together uniquely and specifically in their roles, they were absolutely unbeatable. And I want our adversaries to know that despite all of the talk, is that I am absolutely confident that if events were to spiral and the President of the United States were to order the joint force into combat, I am absolutely confident that the United States and our allies and partners will prevail. And that is not based on any numbers or any unique one capability. It's based most of all of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, guardians, and Coast Guardsmen in the joint force. And it's a way that we knit these capabilities. And I also want our would-be adversaries to know that we're never satisfied with where we are. We're constantly competing, constantly getting better, fielding better capabilities, operating those capabilities better as a team together. And that's the hallmark of what makes the United States military great, our allies and partners and great, and serving in the United States military so great, is that act of never being satisfied with how good we are.
The Chinese in particular lament or they don't like our alliances, our formal alliances with our 5 treaty partners here in Asia, but also the partnerships that we've formed that are a differentiator. And they're not just combat power, they're peace power, because it makes it harder for somebody to go against the international order. What percentage of your time, day to day, week to week, month to month, do you put into partner relationships? That may be hard to quantify, but nobody said it was going to be easy.
80.
Wow. 80%.
80% of my day, every single day, is thinking and working towards that. And that doesn't mean is building personal relationships with other leaders.
Right.
That's the percentage of that percentage or greater is our percentage of operating together. As I utter these words, nearly every military formation that's exercising at this time is partnered with one or more states. As I utter these words everywhere, I mean, that's an estimate, is 80. In my headquarters, just in my day-to-day staff headquarters, we're represented by where there are South American officers that are operating in our headquarters, Korean, Japanese, Australian, Canadian, United Kingdom, French, really almost around the globe. There are officers who are embedded in the headquarters in coalition operations, just in the U.S. Pacific Fleet headquarters. And they're operating in not liaison roles, but the deputy director of operations, a director of international engagement. That's the extent that we're operating in a partnered environment. We have 2 carrier strike groups at sea right now. There are partner and allied ships in those formations. At the completion of this day today, at about X o'clock, I'm going to get into an airplane and fly to Malaysia. Last week, I was in Singapore. I was in Thailand. 3 weeks ago, I was in Japan. I was in Korea. Allied and partnered operations absolutely suffuse every single thing that we do.
And from my time in the Pacific now, about 15 years ago, is at PACOM, that shift from liaison to functional responsibility is a big one. Liaisons are good. The functional responsibility is very real. But U.S. jointness and cooperation with allies and partners is not new. I never flew a combat mission or conducted a ground combat operation without other services in other countries in the arena.
That's right.
So I think we want to get to questions, so that, or we could just talk about flying, but maybe the questions will lead us there. But let me finish my questions with, someday your Navy career will come to an end. We all get passed over for something. You may not make 5-star. It's possible. When I retired from the Air Force, my thing was to ship my Harley Davidson to Seattle, Washington, and ride to the 4 corners of the United States and see this beautiful country that I had the privilege of defending. It was awesome, by the way. When you hang up your flight suit, what's the one thing you'd like to do? I shouldn't put you on the spot in front of a Marine, but what's the one thing you'd like to go do that service life hasn't let you?
Well, for once, I'd like for Maureen to pick where we move instead of the Navy. So, the Forrest Gump School of Military Excellence is, what is your main purpose in life, Gump? To do whatever you tell me to do.
Yeah.
Drill Sergeant Gump, you're a damn genius. So my purpose in life is at least just for once to do what Maureen wants to do after Maureen and the children have gone where the service has sent us over the last 36 years. And so to fulfill Maureen's wishes for once would be my dream.
Well, we've got 3 microphones, but I won't put you on the spot, Maureen. You guys can work that out later. So let's transition now to Q&A. We'll take a couple from the audience. Then I have a couple online. There may be more online, but Give us your best shot. We got one in the middle here, spin. Please stand and get a mic so it, folks online can hear.
Sorry, we'll get to you in just a moment. We have one question online that's pertinent, and I don't think we answered it. Asking exactly what does the Pacific Fleet do?
Well, that's another seminar, isn't it?
Yes.
What's your elevator answer, Pappy,
Well,
to that question?
First, the United States Navy's mission in accordance with Title 10 of the U.S. Code is prompt and sustained combat, incident to operations at sea. U.S. Pacific Fleet's role in that encompasses 60% of the United States Navy. That 60% of the United States Navy is 140,000 sailors and civilians. It's 200 ships, it's 1,600 aircraft, and it's an area of responsibility both within the United States from the Mississippi River in terms of where the forces are stationed to the India-Pakistan border and from the north to the South Pole. The dynamic organizing, manning, training, equipping to standard of that is one of my responsibilities. And then my other responsibility is as the Joint Force Maritime Component Commander of Naval Forces. Those are naval forces at sea and the Fleet Marine Force that are deployed in amphibious readiness groups for United States Indo-Pacific Command stationed here in Hawaii. And so prompt and sustained combat, incident to operations at sea, the organizing, manning, training, equipping of 60% of the United States Navy, and an area encompassed with just a little over 1/2 of the globe is the operating area of the United States Pacific Fleet.
Gentlemen, you both talked a little bit about how inspirational films like Midway and Top Gun were to your service and the impetus to your service. While I don't think the next version of Top Gun will be Top Gun finance officer is in the works. How can we as leaders promote all of those kind of unseen, maybe not as, if you'll pardon the expression, sexy career fields in the Air Force and the Navy and the Army and the Marine Corps and Space Guardians, the things that are happening that are happening in dimly lit rooms, and I'll use the term very deliberately, the domains that we can't necessarily make movies about, and how do we promote those to help retain and recruit our leaders for the next generations?
Yes, I mean there are one of the beauties of being in the U.S. Navy or is in the U.S. military is that wherever your calling is occupationally, there's a role for you to serve the nation. And whether that is comptrollers, if a person who is good at math and likes the result to be an orderly process, that type of person would relish being a comptroller. And without a comptroller, the fuel doesn't get into the airplane doesn't get airborne. For every mission that's ever flown, there are thousands of people that were indispensable to that particular mission. And none of us do this job for the glory of ourselves. We do the job not for glory, but for service. And that's why it's so notable when you encounter somebody in uniform in a 7-Eleven or something, they'll say to you, "Thank you for your service." They don't say thank you for your heroism or thank you for your glamour, because there's an inherent humility in service. And that is putting yourself to the good of a greater mission, of something that's greater than yourself. And so highlighting the service of each and every single person I earlier expressed that there's 340,000 unique intelligences in the United States Navy, and that our job was to have them all be vectored and teaming towards a common goal. And having gratitude for the comptroller, having gratitude for the human being that wrote the code that goes into the airplane, having gratitude for the person that breaks the enemy code that allows the U.S. carrier fleet to close on the Japanese striking force, highlighting those contributions in every single way that we can, of living a life of gratitude, of living a life of respect. You know, I hear people say that we should treat people with dignity and respect. I say, no, everyone has dignity. Therefore, we treat them with respect. And I think we do this by this living the values of treasuring each individual unique pieces of intelligence. For most of my life, one of the things that I wanted to do the most was get into an airplane and go fly it. But an 18-year-old airman on that flight deck, if they don't like what's in that gauge back by the horizontal stabilizer, I'm not going to get to go do that, and they're going to down my airplane. And when we pull me back into the chocks and we chain up the airplane, I come out there and you shake that person's hand and say, man, thanks for having my back. You know, I think that's how we treasure the unique contributions of every single person too. And when you see the greatest champions that in a NBA championship team too, they never talk about themselves. They talk about the team.
So because I have the attention span of a gnat and can't speak that eloquently that long, I'd summarize it as connection, purpose, and mastery. And there actually are studies that say for humans to feel fulfilled, that's what they want. They want to connect, they want to have a purpose in what they do, and they want to master it. And that's really what you just described. You can't make everybody feel like Tom Cruise. I'm not sure you'd want to, but you can connect everybody, whether it's finance or whatever, and make sure they understand their purpose and its connection. And then if you're going to allow mastery, I'm going to bring up another issue that you talked to as well in terms of dignity, respect, and everything else. Is that's you got to trust them. And if they're not going to feel they've mastered what they're doing if you don't trust them. And I, being the less articulate leader, when I meet new folks, I'd say, hey, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you to do your job. If you willfully violate my trust, I will kill you. And they go, what? No, I won't really kill you. But I also don't think you're going to willfully violate my trust. Kind of goes back to the discussion of relieving people, So connection, purpose, mastery, you can't allow people to master the job they've been given if you don't trust them to do it. Okay. Hey, Clint, I know you.
You've touched a couple of times on the importance of leadership. Can you relate what you look for in your future leaders? It's been said that rather than selecting the leaders, you should look to the sailors and the troops. Who do they want for their leader? So touch on that aspect. How do you bubble up our future leaders?
Well, a leader is first, there's not just one leader. Is everybody can be a leader at a particular time, but a leader knows where to go, knows how to get there, and knows how to help people see themselves in the mission so that they will not just follow them, but they'll come along. And so I'm looking for those elements of number one, technical capability as a function of education, training, and practice. And then I'm looking for an influence element of the ability to reach in and to listen and to see where other people are coming from, and then entering into that intellect with them so that they can see themselves get there. And so when people frequently talk about this kind of false choice of I'm a technical guy, or somebody else says I'm a people person too. I don't have any time for a leader that doesn't have technical capability, but also doesn't have empathy, sympathy, decency, the ability to step outside of themselves and see the world through the eyes of your interlocutor too. And so we need comprehensive excellence across human endeavors. And you don't always see it right away in people. It's not like they've got this ineffable quality. So the way that you develop it in people is that you grant an authority and a task. You let the person lead within that task. You give mentorship along the way. And then so that the development of leaders is a conscious and intentional activity. And it's also your duty in the military to train your relief, as they say.
One thing I do was back in the day was ask myself, how much do they look like me? Not physically, but more, watching other leaders, some really fine leaders pick some not so fine next generation leaders. There's kind of a tendency for subordinates to want to reflect the boss, right? And I like me or I wouldn't be me, but that's not the right answer for everybody. And oftentimes when they're showing you a face that looks like yours, they're showing something entirely different anatomically to people below them. So if you know what I'm saying. So I think diversity is a really big term and it's kind of in the news, but there's a lot to it in selecting leaders. Are you picking people who think like you, who look like you, or try to look like you professionally? If you're doing that, you're missing something. And when I was giving a lecture on conflict resolution and deterrence back in the day at APCSS, somebody asked me, how could the Japanese come to make the colossal mistake rather, to attack Pearl Harbor? And my answer was, look around the room. They're all the same dudes. They're like-minded individuals. Of course they reached a bad decision. And diversity matters in all aspects, but most importantly, intellectually and psychologically. All right, do we have one more there, Spin?
Good afternoon, sir.
How you doing?
Good, yourselves?
We're having fun. I don't know about y'all.
All right. So, yes, my name is Staff Sergeant Tizon, representing 125th Finance, Schofield Barracks. So, I just finished the Balikatan 23, and I came back last week. So, actually, before going to my question, I would like to point out one important date. July 4, 1945. That was supposed to be the liberation of the Philippines from the Japanese forces. And also in conjunction with that is the Philippine-American Friendship Day. So it's coming close. So leading to my question is there a decision to restart the USAF, which is also known as the United States Armed Forces of the Far East, in particular, starting up Clark Airfield and Subic Bay, which place I grew up at. So, well, what is your position in that decision, sir? Over to you.
Sergeant Tizon, thank you so much. And welcome back, and great job on Balikatan. It was a historic Balikatan this year. And as we can see with a number of the agreements on the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement between the United States and the Republic of the Philippines, you see that the U.S.-Philippine alliance, one of our oldest and most treasured alliances, we're presently celebrating, almost 80 years of that alliance at this time, and a history that goes back long before that. What the greatest principles that we uphold here within the joint force are these principles of they call it the international rules-based order, but it's really human dignity, human rights, which in the expression among nations is sovereignty. And so within the US and the Philippine alliance, it is the policy of the United States that when the Philippines' sovereign rights are being encroached upon by others, the United States will meet its Article 5 responsibilities in accordance with the mutual defense treaty with the Philippines. On the matter of basing, those matters will be paced by the sovereign desires of the Philippine government in consultation with the greater US government. And I'm in uniform, so I don't get to have a position on it other than I strictly follow the US policy. And there are policies in place right now. There are sovereign rights of the Philippines that are being encroached upon right now. Our partnership, our alliance with the Philippines is presently on an upward trajectory at this time. And I think the agreements and the basings will not only pace the Philippines requirements and the Philippines decisions in accordance with their own political processes and the political processes in the United States. But Bala-Katan has been very successful, and Salak Nib is taking place here very shortly. We are, in fact, operating aircraft out of Clark Field. We are having enriched port visits to Subic Bay and to Manila. We just having had a successful port visit from USS Macon Island, and I think that the trajectory of the relationship is on an upward arc.
Let's try a couple of short online questions if we can.
Two from online.
I've got two right
All
here.
right, answer.
Okay, so they asked long ago. So it could be a yes/no question. Will they ever home port a U.S. carrier in Pearl Harbor?
I don't know.
Okay, that was a 3-word answer. The very difficult issue, Red Hill, timeline now is accelerated for refueling, which is good news for folks here. It's still a very big undertaking, but let's ask about the operational impact. How comfortable are you with that major transition to not having fuel right there, but having it dispersed? Feel good about it? Obviously, it's been a priority for you.
I do feel good. The distribution of those fuel stores throughout the theater where we've made those decisions. Presently, as I utter these words, is about 103.1 million gallons at the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility, and we're going to redistribute that fuel throughout the theater. We've made arrangements here in Hawaii to store the war reserve requirement that is required here in Hawaii with commercial concerns here in Hawaii to have enough here to support our operations. And our decisions of the other places where the fuel goes grants us better distribution and better resiliency of the fuel stores throughout the Pacific that better enables the force to operate, makes the force more responsive. And so I could not be any more supportive of where and how we've made the fuel decisions on where it goes, not just because where the fuel is presently stored represents a hazard to the community, and most of all the military community, because that's how the Red Hill disaster manifested itself, but also what it confers operationally in our combat readiness with the distribution of resources, getting the resources closer to the potential flashpoints for combat, making the force more responsive, more resilient, and more combat ready.
Well, that's good news from my perspective. Spin?
After 100 years, why is the aircraft carrier still relevant to the Navy?
That's a good, well, first, are aircraft still relevant? Yes or no? Yes.
See.
Are ships still relevant? Yes or no? Yes. And in a world where propulsion technology has put all of the world within the reach of weapons, and in a world where precision strike technology has spread throughout the world, is it better or is it worse to have mobile airfields that are constantly on the move and able to counter an enemy's targeting? And the answer to all of those questions is that is what makes the aircraft carrier relevant. To answer the question about the aircraft carrier, you first have to ask yourself, is the aircraft relevant? For the aircraft to not be relevant, you'd be giving up a significant portion of the Earth's atmosphere. Is that everybody will affirm that aircraft are going to continue to be relevant. And so in an aircraft carrier, you have a mobile airfield that is always on the move. And its ability to be always on the move and your ability to execute counter-targeting capabilities makes it an ever more relevant capability now. We will never ask for diplomatic permission to operate an aircraft carrier. We'll never have to ask a country, is it okay if we operate our airplanes out of your airfield? We'll never, ever have to ask that question. And that airfield can touch 90% of the world. That airfield can. And we'll continue to upgrade that aircraft carrier with terminal defenses. We'll continue to upgrade the systems around it that execute counter-targeting. But in the end, what makes the aircraft carrier relevant are the magazine of weapons and capability that are in its hold, which are profound, its mobility and its ability to reach out and to project combat power, either strike power, air superiority, anti-submarine warfare across the range of military operations. And the aircraft carrier is still in its infancy as a combat capability of the joint force. I landed an aircraft on USS Enterprise in December of 2012. Enterprise had been commissioned 51 years earlier. And when Enterprise was commissioned, we were still employing propeller airplanes when it was first brought on into service. I landed a 2-year-old F-18 Super Hornet with an AESA radar, with an advanced electromagnetic suite, with reduced signatures. I landed that aircraft 51 years after that carrier was incorporated. And we've got unmanned capabilities that we're bringing online. And so the answer to your question is a resounding, as long as aircraft and as long as ships are going to be relevant, aircraft carriers most certainly will as well.
And for all the valuable contributions of our allies and partners, there are a few things that only the U.S. can do. And one is the reach of the carrier, and the other, says the airman, who has put in a plug, is the reach of the Air Force, because our very large, very capable refueling fleet. The fighters and bombers are the sexy part, but without gas, you're not going to kick butt. And it's true, those are differentiators from every other service. So do we have one more there, Spin?
Yes, I think a really relevant one. What is the role for the United States Coast Guard? Do you see an expanded U.S. Coast Guard role in the Pacific going forward?
I see. First, semper paratus to any coasties that are in the crowd. Absolutely, yes, indispensable. And one of the topics of this is called lawfare. Lawfare generally falls into what's called the gray zone, and the gray zone is certain states, state actors, non-state actors that want to act aggressively or to conduct malign activities by force without risking open, uniformed, acknowledged combat. And so some of these areas are where maritime militia and where Coast Guards can be brought to bear. And so Coast Guards, with their law enforcement emphasis, with their maritime security emphasis, many of our partners operate navies that's where their function is securing borders, countering illicit narcotics, countering illicit trafficking, enforcing fisheries, enforcing maritime safety. And these are emphasis items of the United States Coast Guard, indispensable and distinct, but interdependent with what the Navy and the Marine Corps does. And the Coast Guard's been visionary in expanding that role. As I utter these words, the cutter Stratton is in the Western Pacific operating right now. The iconic cutter Midget is alongside here in Pearl Harbor, and our partnership with the Coast Guard could not be deeper. Semper Paratus.
Any more? We'll take one more, and then the Admiral has agreed to stick around for conversations for a bit before he has to get back to his duties. And of course, I have a nap to take this afternoon.
Well, one more from online. Admiral, was your first trap landing aboard the old Lexington?
It was CV-16, October 26, 1988. Aboard USS Lexington, the flight lead was Commander Dick Bushhog Nelson in a T-2 Buckeye. The USS Lexington had fought in the Second World War. It was an honor to land on her. I have no memory of the trap itself because I was viewing the world through 2 soda straws with my heart beating 1,000 beats per minute. And that Lexington had teak decks that were covered in non-skid. It had a steel plate where the landing area was, and it was landing jet aircraft at the time too. So to have trained on a World War II aircraft carrier that was here in Pearl Harbor during the Second World War, wow, and having been led by a Vietnam veteran, that thread of history and tradition is one of the greatest honors of my life.
I can't think of a better way to wrap up the formal discussion. Admiral Pappy, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for sharing with the group, and thank you for your leadership and your friendship.
Thanks, Big.
Aloha, folks.
Aloha. Thank you so much, Admiral. I'd like to thank all of our guests today here in our theater and online. Our museum education programs will continue on this year, and it's our first one for this year. And thank you again, Admiral, so much for being with us.